It is my pleasure to introduce Professor Gwanseob Shin, cause and consequence of text neck syndrome.
Hi. Anyway, thank you for giving me this excellent opportunity to come here and share my research outcomes with you. Actually, I've done this kind of research for about 10 years, but I have not actually presented in front of audience because that's the job of my students. And it's a very unique experience for me as well. I actually prepared a PPT for a 20-minute talk, and it appears that I have to spend 10 more minutes, but that's okay. I mean, spending more time than needed is what professors are good at, so bear with me. Okay, the title of my talk is Causes and Consequences of Text Neck. Text neck symptoms of syndromes are, you all know and you are exposed to. Pain symptoms and disorders, discomfort after you use a smartphone is mostly texting for a certain period of time. We are very familiar of that. And we started this research about 2014 based on some recommendations and also some questions from the physicians. They wanted to know what would happen actually if this continues. They received a lot of complaints from their patients, and they didn't know the causes, and also they didn't know how to treat them. There was no paper or publication regarding the causes and also the risk factors. So we started research in 2014, and my talk is about what we have done for the past almost 10 years to find out the causes mainly. And then later of this talk, I'll talk about the potential consequences. All right, smartphone penetration rate. I used to use this kind of slide for the past few years, but to address that the population smartphone users is growing, but I don't have to mention it anymore because everyone is using it. So it's not a user anymore. It's population. Entire population is using smartphone for not only for communication, but also information search or exchanging the knowledge and everything. Current record of last year, smartphone penetration rate in the United States exceeded 80%. In some countries like Korea, actually the penetration rate is over 100, meaning many people having two phones. What's the amount of exposure that we experience every day? It's a record presented 1 or 2 years ago. Adults usually 4 hours and 10 minutes every day using their phones, and number of gestures exceeded 2,500 per day. Well, I didn't count those numbers, but everyone knows that we actually do more than that. And I carry my smartphone every day. I don't text a lot, but I'm heavily dependent on my smartphone as well. We use phones while walking, while commuting, even on the bed. So every day and every hour we use smartphones. We are exposed to these kinds of exposures. So the very basic question within this environmental change is this happening really? Well, we started, from here. We're about here and about to change to here. And if it continues, do we expect to see this kind of thing? Is this the future of us? Maybe. Not in our generation, but maybe generations later. So this is a line of research questions that we came up with. And so we tried to figure out the causes. We wanted to know how severe that their head posture is and how often they're exposed to those text neck postures and how long. And then we wanted to know how the associations or relationships between these risk factors and causes and some intermediate consequences. to maintain the posture, do we need more muscular effort to maintain this posture? Will that cause fatigue on the neck muscles? Or if it continues, will that cause pain or discomfort symptoms? Eventually, will it affect our tissue? Are we going to be deformed eventually to this posture? We don't know. We have finished up to this level, and we are working on this. And maybe next year at the next SPA presentation, I may be able to talk a little bit about this change, because we are now looking at some evidence in our experiment about potential tissue change because of prolonged exposures to this text neck posture. Okay, this is the study that we conducted about 8 or 9 years ago. We published this paper in 2015. It was a very basic experiment. The research question was, how much do we bend our neck or head when you use a smartphone? Interesting, there was no such record at all available. And we need to know this first before figuring out the consequences. So we conducted a simple lab experiment with 20 students who are very familiar with their smartphones. They use it every day. And we invite them, and we put some markers to capture the head motions. And we ask them to make 2 postures in sitting and standing. In each posture, we ask them to do texting, 2-handed texting, and 1-handed web browsing, and simple video watching while holding the phone in one hand. And while they are conducting those tasks, we quantified head forward tilt angle relative to neutral. Neutral meaning we captured the zeroed angle when they were looking straight forward in standing. So, in conclusion, as you can easily expect, when they were using their phones in sitting, their head was tilted more, about 5 degrees more, compared to when they were using their phones in standing. That's simply because they feel more comfortable, and also they typically put their hands near their lap, because holding the phone for neck comfort makes discomfort on the arm and shoulder. And arm and shoulder muscles are bigger muscles, and it's heavy. So we typically lay down our hands down, sacrificing our neck. That's typical. And so our participants maintain around 39 to 45 degrees when they were doing texting, browsing in seated posture. If you compare the postures between those 3 applications, they maintained over 40 degrees. They had at over 40 degrees in front when they were doing texting using their both hands. And that posture was more severe compared to postures for web browsing and video watching. It's relevant to the load on the hand. When they're using both the hands, their priority is for the shoulder and arm comforts. So they lay hand down further, and it required them to bend further. So again, texting is more risky and dangerous compared to single hand web browsing and video watching. After this experiment, a lot of subsequent research studies have conducted worldwide, and interestingly, I've done many ergonomics research for the past almost close to 20 years, and this one was the biggest hit. And 6 years publication, it was cited over 300 times already. And that's quite unusual in ergonomics area. It means everyone was looking for this kind of information. So after this, we had another question. Well, we collected this data in the laboratory condition under controlled environment. We asked them to sit on a certain chair and use their phones, comfortably, but I don't know whether they were actually comfortable or not. So we had another study to quantify the posture and usage pattern in their daily activity. So luckily, we were able to had a good sensor wireless the sensor. So we conducted a field evaluation study. We recruited 31 students in our campus. And then we applied this wearable the inertial measurement unit sensor on their forehead. It's battery-powered, wireless, and memory embedded. And it captures accelerations as well as orientations. And then we asked them to leave the lab and have a daily activity in school. For 8 hours, we recorded those data 8 hours continuously. In addition to that, we installed a tracking app on their smartphone, which was synchronized to this sensor. And the tracking app captures their usage pattern. So time of application on and off and durations. And also we captured the tilt angle of the smartphone itself. And all those data were synchronized with the posture data from the head sensor. So during the 8-hour typical daily school activity period, our 31 young students were supposed to study hard. You can see the clear differences between these two columns. When they were not using their phones, they spend most of their time with their head maintained around from 0 to less than 30 degrees. However, when they're using their phones, when they're watching their phones, they spend most of their time with their heads tilted around 20 to close to 40 or 50 degrees. So again, this result confirmed our laboratory experiment. So yes, young students are using their phones a lot. And when they're using their phones, they maintain their head approximately 30 to 40 degrees. So that's clear sign of risk, especially for their cervical spine. So next, we wanted to know what would be potential consequence of maintaining the head at 30 or 40 degrees when they were using their phones. So we conducted another study, laboratory study, with 21 participants. For this experiment, we measured not only the head postures, but also the myoelectric activity of the neck extensor muscles, the cervical spine extensor muscles. And we asked them to use their phones in 3 different posture conditions: sitting, standing, and walking. In each posture, they conducted browsing and texting. So there are six combinations. And we quantified the electromyography amplitude, tilt angle, and also the posture of upper back. And if we subtract this out of this, then it gives us a neck flexion angle. So let's take a look at the results. Well, the head posture is what we expected from our previous studies. When they were using their phone while walking, the head posture was very similar to the posture when they were standing. Slightly less than the sitting, but again, very similar to the standing. However, if you look at the activity of neck extensor muscles, when they were using their phones while walking, even the head posture is less than that compared to sitting, their muscle activity is greater than when they were using their phones in sitting. So it was kind of interesting result. They were maintaining less tilt posture when they were using their phone while walking, but muscle activity was higher. That's because of acceleration that they were exposed to when they were walking. We actually were able to capture the amount of accelerations. It was quite high. And to maintain a stable posture, because they have to fixate their eyes on the screen, they try to use these muscles more against accelerations. And those kind of efforts made additional muscular load on neck extensors, and that resulted in the higher activity when they were using their phones while walking compared to while sitting. So if we take a look at all the results, the most dangerous usage pattern is two-handed texting while walking. That's most common scenario that nowadays that everyone is exposed, especially young people. Okay, now that's the problem of neck. What happens to our back then? You know, walking without swinging our arms and holding it and bending down clearly damages our neck, but will it affect our back? So we did another study with another set of participants. This time we measured the electromyography muscle activity of low back extensors, right here. For this, we included two additional conditions to isolate the effect of smartphone use from the bound arm conditions. There are 5 experimental conditions: normal walking, browsing with one hand while walking, texting with both hands while walking, walking without smartphone, but one arm was bound and 2 arms bound and walking. If you look at the results, higher meaning more activity of more muscular load on the lower back extensor muscles. As you can easily expect, when they're using their phones in standing and walking, they use more low back muscle effort compared to when they were using the phone, compared to when they're simply normal walking, and also compared to bound walking. And that, we believe that's because of the posture change. When they were using their phones in front and walking, because the center of mass is slightly shifted forward, to maintain the posture, they tend to tilt the upper back slightly backward. And that kind of thing was achieved by additional effort from the muscles on the lower back. So if the users or population continues this kind of behavior every day, every week or months, they're actually making some changes to the musculoskeletal structures not only on the cervical spine, but also the lumbar spine. That's kind of temporary change, but if it continues, we don't know what would happen. That's what actually we are trying to figure out in these days. Okay, I'm just checking my time. All right, and next one is a little bit our side branch of the study, distraction. We are not actually interested in the distraction, but our government has funded about this because safety, road safety was critical issue. And we wanted to know the situation awareness of smartphone users on the street. But it was not easy to do a field study, so we designed a laboratory experiment inside, and we installed a projector on ceiling. And in dark room, smart users were walking on a treadmill, low treadmill, and we actually moved visual cues from here toward the participant when participants were walking on the treadmill. And they were supposed to detect the incoming visual cues while they were using their phones. And there were 3 different conditions: slow walking, preferred walking speed faster, and we adjusted also the contrast of the visual cues from high to low. So if you look at the low condition, very low condition, I mean, kind of a gray color visual cue on white background and walking faster than they preferred. And they were able to detect that incoming visual cue when they were texting approximately 1.6 meters in front of them, which means they were not aware of anything until it comes within 1.6 meters. Think about the worst case. One person, smartphone user, approaching, and I'm walking also using smartphone. They don't know each other's presence until you have about 1.6 meter gap. Would it be sufficient for you to avoid collision? If you are lucky, but maybe not. So this is kind of a risky situation. And in ideal condition, they were able to see the oncoming target at 3 meter distance when they're walking very slowly, and the visual cue was clearly distinguished from the background. So approximately 2 meters, that's the safe distance. I mean, you can try. After this experiment, I had a kind of weird habit. There are a lot of the pedestrians who are using smartphones watching towards me. I try to confirm my findings, so I walk towards them. I don't use my smartphone. I'm ready to evade. I walk towards them, and actually they didn't know my presence until the 2 meters. It's interesting, regardless of the age. So someone should do something to make, I don't know, we have to install some bright, some things on our shoes. I don't know. but we have to do something. This is the first study regarding the situation awareness on ground target for smartphone users. Okay, now back to the original question. We were able to provide some answers about this and also this. Now we are looking at the next step of consequences. Fatigue, if you maintain this posture for smartphone use. Muscle fatigue, yes or no? Pain, of course, but how severe, we will look at it. Tissue change, that's most important issue, because if this changes, it means we adapt to the environment, to this interface. If it continues, we may eventually see this kind of permanent changes. So now we are in the stage of looking at this tissue change, which is quite difficult because we have to make some certain changes to our participants. It's quite painful and dangerous, but we are doing it hard. And maybe next year we'll be able to share some preliminary outcomes about this potential tissue change. I guess I spent 26 minutes, which gives only 4 minutes for questions. Thank you.